Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Favianna Rodriguez, and I am the founder and president at the Center for Cultural Power. And I'm really excited to be hosting a panel today, Pass the Mic, Centering Communities of Color in Climate Storytelling. I am joining you from unceded Ohlone territory, also known as Oakland, California. And it's so appropriate to be recognizing the lands that we are all joining you from today because our topic today is climate crisis and how we can elevate the stories of Black, Indigenous communities of color in promoting solutions to this crisis that is affecting us all, and that day by day we are seeing the true impacts of it. If facts and figures were going to solve the climate crisis, we would have solved it long ago. Now, we have the science, we have the technology, but we don't have the political will or the popular imagination. We need climate stories now. We need stories that uplift people of color who have been most impacted, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. And we need these in a way that does not perpetuate the status quo, in a way that does not just center white people or does not just talk about melting glaciers or polar bears, but that really looks at the root causes of this climate crisis. The norm for so long in our popular culture has been narratives of extractive capitalism. And that is the story that some bodies, whether it's human bodies, animal bodies, oceans, forests, can be exploited for the benefit of a few privileged bodies. But in this age of pandemic and climate crisis and racial reckoning, these old narratives are just not holding up. And so we need new stories in this era. We need stories that are authentic, stories that move us, and stories that give us the courage to truly confront what lays in front of us. And so these are some of the things we'll be exploring in today's panel: how film and stories can help accelerate a movement for climate justice, and that can speak to our hearts and our minds. And the work of creatives and artists, filmmakers, and even community organizers is so critical in helping us shape this new reality and to disrupt these oppressive narratives, and to help us imagine new solutions. And so I am so thrilled to host this panel of amazing people transforming culture and politics around climate crisis. Joining us from the film To the End, which will be premiering at Sundance on Sunday and then rescreening on Tuesday, are two brilliant culture changers. To the End goes behind the scenes of the climate movement, where young people are rejecting entrenched power structures that have failed to meaningfully address climate change. So, first, we have Sabrina Schmidt Gordon, the producer and impact producer for the film. Sabrina is an award winning documentary filmmaker and impact strategist from New York City. She was selected for the prestigious Women at Sundance Fellowship in 2017, and she is the co chair of the Black Documentary Collective and member of the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences. Welcome, Sabrina. Also joining us, Varshini Prakash, a featured leader in the film To the End, the executive director of Sunrise, a movement of young people working to stop climate change, take back our democracy from big oil, and elect leaders who fight for everyone's well being and health. In 2018, Varshini helped lead a mass demonstration for the Green New Deal that went viral and really put the Green New Deal on the map, especially for members of Congress. In 2020, she was named the Biden Sanders Unity Task Force for Climate Policy. Welcome, Varshini. And our third guest is Layel Camargo. Layel is a descendant of Yaqui and Yoreme Mayo tribes of the Sonoran Desert. They are a cultural strategist, land steward, filmmaker, and artist. They are transgender and non binary. And Layel has spent the last decade advancing climate justice through storytelling. With the Center of Cultural Power, Layel created Climate Woke, a national campaign to center BIPOC voices in climate justice. And last year, Layel founded Shelterwood Collective, a land-based organization that teaches land stewardship. Layel today will be talking about the Climate Storytelling Playbook, which is created by writers, for writers, And it's a tool that's meant to inspire television and film writers in how to write intersectional climate stories that really move us beyond the stereotype. So, just thrilled to have a panelist of such powerful change makers in this urgent movement. So I'll go ahead and start us off. We are in the age of climate catastrophe that is disproportionately, and I would say criminally, impacting communities of color, as well as vulnerable groups like young people, elders, disabled, LGBTQ, migrants. So climate change, it's everywhere. It's part of our reality, and yet it's hardly on television and film. And according to new research by USC and Good Energy Project, less than 3% of scripted television and film between 2016 and 2020 talked about the crisis. And so we see a real problem in the narratives that are presented. Let's start off with you, Layel. Why do you think we have such few stories of climate on television and film?
First off, thanks for having me here, Favianna. Talking about the climate crisis and our current storytelling archetype is difficult. We've learned storytelling through romance, drama, and comedy. And although climate change is the biggest crisis we will have as a human species, talking about it is difficult because, just to be truthful, most of us are so scared to get it wrong. And the way that it's talked about in our modern day society, it's dominated by science and political controversy, and for the most part, that ostracizes most of us. Although we are all being impacted, are not thinking about this crisis as part of our own issue areas. And even though we're seeing it being incorporated more in mainstream media, the reality is that stories like Fur Gully and Snowpiercer are still feel so far away and so sci-fi that it's kind of like it's playing alongside the reality that there has been a 2 to 3 generation strategy that has allowed us to be desensitized to what's happening to the world. And especially for us as people of color, as filmmakers of color, racial justice and economic disenfranchisement are the core themes that tend to follow our storytelling. So I think everything from how we understand the climate crisis to the fact that we're really scared about getting it wrong to the fact that us as Black and Indigenous people of color, there are other issue areas that unfortunately are attached to our survival.
And Sabrina, why do you think at this moment it's so critical to uplift the stories of impacted communities who have been most hurt by the climate crisis?
Hi, thank you for having me. And I think for all the reasons that you said, that when we're talking about who is most impacted by the climate crisis, and when I say impacted, impacted in really measurable, concrete, uh, day-to-day life ways. I mean, we're talking about communities of color. And I think just generally, we are still, especially in the filmmaking space, whether we're talking about fiction or nonfiction, we still need more stories from communities of color, and we're still grappling with and challenging what stories are being told, how they're being told, and especially who is getting to tell them. So, for all of those reasons, I think it's just really important to be uh, telling these stories. And also, I would add too that I think sometimes when we're talking about a climate story, it's still for some reason in the at least when I think about American audiences, like in the American imagination, it still seems somehow like a somewhat esoteric uh, topic for some reason. And even, uh, and I think we have to do more for people to really make the connection about how it impacts their lives on a day-to-day basis.
I love that you said that, Sabrina, because in reality, what we're dealing with is a worldview problem. And that is that capitalism, white supremacy, and the extractive economy, in a way, has impacted our imagination in a way that has us feeling stuck as artists and storytellers. And we're going to be delving into what we're doing about that in just a few minutes. And Varshini, speaking of culture shift, just because these things are not necessarily in film and television, there is definitely a culture shift that's been happening over the last few years that you've been a part of. I just returned from the UN climate conference a few months ago in Glasgow, and I was really blown away by how people throughout the world, throughout the African continent, throughout this hemisphere, young people, especially girls, indigenous tribes, were really naming that the climate crisis is a result of colonization and an extractive economy. And so to see that shift that has really grown from the grassroots, and is so different than, even 10 years ago, was tremendously inspiring. And you are doing the work at the front lines. You're head of one of the most powerful youth movements. And why do you think it's important that we talk about climate crisis as that is resulting from racist policies and white supremacy?
Well, hi. It is such an honor to be here and such an honor to be amongst all of you. You're doing such tremendous and inspiring work. And thank you for having me. I really appreciated that you said that there has been a huge shift in the way we talk about the climate crisis over the last decade. And I want to mark that I think the only reason why is because of historic, massive, courageous international resistances by Indigenous people. And because there have been 7 million children rising up across the world in protest, and because young people and immigrants and people of color like Jamal Bowman and Ilhan Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have made great sacrifices and stepped into their agency and power to run for and win office. And so I just want to name, I think that shift is primarily because movements outside and inside the halls of power have been getting organized. And I think if we think about, why this story gets told, really the story I learned about the climate crisis is that, well, it started in 1988 when James Hansen testified about the reality of carbon in the atmosphere heating up our planet in front of Congress. And I would argue that it started way, way sooner, how we got into the mess that we did. And I would argue that it started when millions of Indigenous people were killed in a mass genocide across this country that defined the foundations of our nation. And it started when we participated and created a system of slavery for economic gain and set forward a system of unequal, unjust treatment for Black Americans that exists today. And to me, if Black lives mattered to people in power, we wouldn't be building refineries or petrochemical plants or pipelines in Black and Brown communities. If we valued Black and Indigenous life, we would have been well on our way to solving the climate crisis after Hurricane Katrina. And I think, to know that we have created so-called sacrifice zones in poor working class neighborhoods, that wealthy and powerful people have intentionally picked places where Indigenous people, Black folks, Latinos, immigrants have lived and chosen those places to site their polluting facilities, or to say, those are the places that will be impacted disproportionately because of the climate crisis, is because of the political and economic disenfranchisement of those communities. And so I want to say there is no way to solve the crisis without solving its root cause. And there is no way to solve the climate crisis without addressing racial and economic injustice in the process that were created by colonization, empire, white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy.
Yes. Yes, Varshini. I love that you said this because we're not going to see change neither in politics nor in the world of culture. And I believe that part of the reason why folks have been so stuck in the entertainment industry is because the entertainment industry continues to be led by white men who are not having the narrative depth at understanding that the root cause of this begins with colonization, genocide, the exploitation of certain bodies, because that's what it comes down to is, and you said it so beautifully, that it has been allowed to exploit and poison. And in the film, our friend Rihanna Gunn Wright, folks don't know that behind the Green New Deal is a brilliant Black woman who helped author it, Rihanna Gunn-Wright, and she says something in the film which she says, as long as you can poison a group of people without consequence, the fossil fuel industry will find loopholes to do just that.
That's right.
And that's what has been happening. And I love that in this film, um, uh, and I love that in this film, we see the powerful work that emerges when we're able to tell the stories of frontline movements, but also the stories of so many women of color whose analysis goes beyond business as usual and is exploring things from all kinds of angles. Sabrina, what did you find most powerful about this collaboration with grassroots movement?
Thank you so much, Varshini, for everything that you said. And, so much about what we're talking about, when you asked me the question earlier about why it's important to tell the stories, what really attracted me to this story is that we were going to be exploring the fight for climate justice through the narratives of 4 powerful young women of color. And I think when we're talking about storytelling, who gets to tell the stories and how we get to tell it. And I think when we're talking about communities of color that are really are the most vulnerable when it comes to the climate crisis, we also have to show ourselves as the agents of change as well. And I think another issue around telling climate stories is that they tend to feel like really overwhelming and very gloom and doom. And I think another thing about this film that was really appealing to me is that I was so inspired. I mean, so truly inspired by the brilliance and vision and tenacity of these 4 young women, that even though it is a big lift, I mean, we're talking about not just climate justice, but we're talking about racial and economic justice in the process. I mean, that's not a small order, but I feel like when we, hopefully what you will take away from the film is like what I took away in the process of working on it, is that this systemic change and this like sweeping like transformation that we're talking about is really within reach and is really, really possible.
Yes, thank you so much, Sabrina. Yes, we actually need to see narratives reflected back to us that helps us find our power and gives us courage, but also gives us a breadth of strategies. Because, unfortunately, the fossil fuel companies have us thinking that it's about individual responsibility, and they have been so successful at casting the light at consumers when in reality the majority of emissions are coming from the richest people in this world, and they're coming from companies. And so the fact that we can see stories that empower, in which everyday folks are empowered, but not just that groups like Sunrise Movements, Justice Democrats, which was an organization that was helped elect folks like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Presley, uh, are so critical and actually help inspire us to something different. And I would say, as excitement is going around the Green New Deal, I remember recently seeing a video by Molly Crabapple about a vision that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had. And I thought to myself, we really, really need more pop culture around the Green New Deal. And then I started seeing murals in the streets. And so the way to popularize, the way to build political will is by creating a fertile soil. And you do that with art and culture. And so, Varshini, I would like to ask you, y'all been growing at Sunrise Movement. Y'all been growing your power since 2019 when the Green New Deal was introduced. What was it like to collaborate with filmmakers, and how are you seeing the role of culture in your work?
Yeah, I think something that is really meaningful about being able to work with Sabrina and Rachel is that I find, in the very limited amount of space and time that people talk about the crisis, they usually talk about the story of the crisis, how we got here, the disaster, the gloom and doom, the time left we have to solve it, and very, very infrequently focus on the story of the resistance. And I think what was inspiring to me about this story was this was focusing so much about what everyday, ordinary, talented and awesome, yes, but very ordinary young people were doing to step up to fight back against these huge, systems of oppression and an industry that is so well funded, and is fighting tooth and nail to protect its bottom line. And so I think also when we tell the story of the resistance, if you look at any social movement throughout history, it is oftentimes led by the folks who are the most impacted, who are the most vulnerable to the crisis that they are fighting. And so I think it was, I've spent a lot of time with students, with teachers, and seen the way people are so focused on the crisis that they miss the story of the resilience, of the resistance that is emerging before our eyes and is inspiring thousands of other flowers to bloom. And I think the other piece of this was oftentimes people see the big demonstrations, they see the sit-ins, they see the rallies, they see, all of these peak moments of conflict. But, these moments where there's just a bunch of people scribbling on whiteboards in a room, or the joy, the songs, the debates between each other, those are the moments that really make a movement. And I think it's really exciting to see a documentary that is giving people a view on what it means to be in a social movement organization, and hopefully allows for people to experience that in a different way than just what they read on the news. And then I'd also say, it was intensely vulnerable. Movements are messy. We make mistakes. I was 22 when I started working on Sunrise, and it was like a really intimate and vulnerable thing to be able to trust and work with Rachel and Sabrina's team. And I think they really embody like a model for how media can work more with social movement organizations, and tell the story, but not take away from the integrity in the process of doing that.
Yes, absolutely. Messiness and conflict is what makes such a great story, and that's what I love about, the world of film and television, is that we could actually get into the imperfections of folks and really what it takes to lead. We mentioned the doom and gloom issue, which is very real, and that is, the doom and gloom refers to the idea that the climate crisis is so overwhelming that we move into a space of feeling disempowered and feeling overwhelmed by the sadness of it, and feelings of grief, of course, emerge, and yet being stuck in the doom and gloom has been something that has impeded a lot of screenwriters. We're going to talk a little bit about a new project that is going to launch very soon in April, and that is the Climate Storytelling Playbook. And so a bunch of us, including Layel, and in partnership with Good Energy Project, realized that we simply don't have enough climate narratives on television. In 2019, climate was mentioned on 3 fiction TV shows, just 3 times, and it was small mentions. And so if television is about reflecting the world we live in a world of climate chaos. And so there's the Climate Storytelling Book Project interviewed over 100 script writers and tried to identify what was holding them back, what were they having a trouble in terms of creating narratives. And from that came the Climate Storytelling Playbook, which will be the first ever of its kind. And it's going to be a resource that helps writers by telling inspiring stories. And those stories are, the stories of folks like you, Varshini, the stories of folks who also grew up in polluted communities, who are being forced to abuse nature, right? Like we're seeing in animal agriculture. And so we compile that, and that's going to be a tool that's going to launch. And so, Layel, a question for you. Tell us more about why this tool is so important, especially in television. More and more people are watching television. Why do we need a tool like this for writers and audiences?
Yeah, to basically, I think I'm going to include a lot of the things that Sabrina and Varshini have been saying, which is, I would sum it up to about three things, is that the industry has a lot of gatekeeping that now has become evident to us, where a lot less filmmakers and creatives of color, as well as women and gender oppressed people, have not been able to access the level of being allowed to work in networks, or to allow their TV shows or their films to get picked up. And so I think that as that begins to shift, we'll start to see what's actually possible. But as of now, there are still in the playbook, when we started to interview screenwriters and other creatives, they started to say, we're actually nervous to talk about climate or pitch anything that would even mention, let alone center the climate crisis as a theme, because we think our show's not going to get picked up. And so this gatekeeping that is happening in Hollywood as the largest industry in the world, that is going to start to shift. The other thing is that there is the possibility now of a new story. As we're all talking, is that we know that white-centered stories that center white heroes, as well as enforce every belief, everything from the extractive economy to individualism, has been the norm of our storytelling. And as you are all mentioning, that film and TV is an opportunity for us to start to get a little bit messy. We are incorporating new values into our society that have complications, that have messiness, that allow for us to be able to make the climate justice warrior the cool character, no longer the pun of the joke. And that new story is going to start to allow the climate crisis to begin to be normalized. And then lastly, the solutions are complicated. They are hard. And the ones that surface highest to the top are the ones that benefit our capitalistic system. And so, as we begin to do more storytelling, we'll start to see how the audience will start to push back with the storytellers around, that's not the holistic solution. Here's how we're going to advance the narrative. And we'll start seeing more screenwriters come in and be able to highlight true holistic solutions, which require a return to land, a stewardship, and just long-term adaptation with the climate crisis, because we do not have a lot of time to get ahead of some of these high dangers that are being predicted. But that even in that, so we'll be stuck with a 30 to 50 year fixing the issue. So I think as we begin to shift, as we begin to diversify our storytellers, as we begin to get clear around what these holistic solutions are, I think it'll become a little bit easier for us to tell the stories, and for us to see more mainstream stories that can resonate with audiences, which we've been sold a hegemonic story. And I think the time to shift it is really now.
Thank you, Layel. And yes, what you're highlighting really is that the same way we fight monoculture in climate, right? You know, monoculture is what is destroying our world. Monoculture, and that is also in the culture we consume, is monoculture, and that is that overwhelmingly we have been consuming the stories that center white men. And as a result, it is easier to exploit people of color. It's easier to pollute and poison our communities because our stories have not been amplified. And so I love how you're tying in the gatekeeping of the cultural industry is very much parallel to the same kind of gatekeeping that we're seeing around solutions to climate. We are facing an entrenched white male power that is concerned with greed, with profiteering, rather than creating spaces where everyone can thrive and everyone's story is also made visible. And, you know, Sabrina, you are not only a, you know, wonderful, amazing filmmaker, but you're also now part of the Academy. You are part of the institutions that are changing Hollywood. And I'm curious, what are you seeing as the role of filmmakers in this moment of climate crisis, and especially when it comes to folks of color? What are you noticing, or what gets you excited about the possibilities in the industry?
Yeah, so I mean, there's so much I think to be excited about. I don't know how familiar folks are about the the industry, but in over the last 2 years, I mean, which really was sparked by the massive protests of 2020, that there's been like this sort of reckoning that's been happening, not just like in all aspects of our lives, including our own industry. And filmmakers of color are like having like new resolve around like changing the game, challenging gatekeepers, and also it's not just about the equity and the inclusion, but it's about also like just centering our work and maybe thinking about new ways and new structures about how we go about doing what we're doing. And I think like for me, like someone who's like a member of the Academy, for example, like we're already starting to see how certain things around within the industry are shifting, that we're demanding, like even in the Academy, I don't have it in front of me, but there are new rules that have to do with inclusion in order to even, qualify for certain awards. So that is actually very exciting, and that's only because there are people that look like us that are getting access to the Academy in ways that we did not have access before. I think I want to add too that in terms of like storytelling, and this is to just sort of riff off of a little bit of what Varshini said about telling the story of the movement of activism. One of the things that I think was really important to Rachel and I is that people are able to see themselves in the story and to see themselves as part of a movement, and that there's a place for them in the movement and that they can be part of that. So I just wanted to make sure that, to acknowledge and add that in terms of storytelling. And it speaks to like what we can be doing as filmmakers of color, because we see so much what story you choose to tell, how you choose to tell it, and who gets to tell it makes all the difference in the world in terms of like what is amplified, what is centered, and what is disrupted by doing that.
Yes, that's so critical, and especially when we think about that, the roots of the environmental justice movement in this country began in Black communities, and it's so appropriate that our panel today is hosted by Macro, who also was very key in bringing films about like Judas and the Black Messiah, because I'm from Oakland, and this is the home of the Black Panther Party, and as we are now uncovering, right, crimes against our communities, right, how organizers were targeted, I would love to see that work also share the folks who launched our climate justice movements. These stories are yet to be told, right? The folks in the South, folks in New Orleans who are dealing with cancer alleys, stories about Katrina. There is so much to uncover when it comes to climate devastations and how our communities have been just poisoned and polluted and sacrificed as the crisis gets worse and worse. And now, of course, we are seeing the normalization of extreme weather. And so the moment for storytellers, for filmmakers to tell the stories of the past and now is so important, as well as stories of the future. And I want to take a moment here to just talk about Indigenous storytelling, because also in 2021, what we saw was the first shows that were centering Native folks, run by Native folks, where Native folks were really able to shape how they wanted their shows. And of course, those two shows are Rutherford Falls and Reservation Dogs. And while Indigenous people, we are on Indigenous land, and the erasure that the industry has done has actually helped create the climate crisis, because it is Indigenous people, whether at Standing Rock, whether blocking pipelines, who have put their bodies on the line. And so I want to take a moment to talk about Indigenous storytelling and to really lift up the powerful paradigm shift that Indigenous folks are leading, especially when they are naming that colonization is the root cause and that we have to urgently move towards repair. Last year when I was at Glasgow, I was so inspired by the number of Indigenous women leaders that were from Turtle Island. Of course, Turtle Island is what we refer to as this hemisphere that is called the Americas. And some of the folks who were there at Glasgow have also been involved in increasing opportunities for Indigenous storytellers and culture keepers who have been so ignored by television and film. And there's a powerful new exciting initiative called Amazonia 2041, A Vision for the Future. And we're going to be showing a clip from this 9-minute film, which is illustrated by the celebrated Ecuadorian artists Sofia Acosta and David Sur, and narrated by Indigenous storyteller Elizabeth Swanson Andy. And this short film takes us on a journey set in 2041, which is looking at how Indigenous movements succeeded in permanently protecting the Amazon sacred waters region, which is such an important region in the Ecuadorian and Peruvian Amazon that measures 35 million hectares and where 600,000 people from 30 indigenous nationalities live. And so this idea of futurism, right, of how our world can look like if we make bold solutions now, if we take the action that's needed. So let's go ahead and show a clip from this short film.
The year is 2041. The age of extraction has finally given way to the age of buen vivir, and a beautiful bioeconomy is thriving around the globe. I'm here looking back at how we protected this rainforest, and in doing so, transformed the world. To reach this future, we had to start by facing our past. Thousands of years ago, my Amazonian ancestors already knew that the earth is alive, and that this forest is its beating heart, something only recently discovered by science. And because they saw the world as alive, and themselves as an integral part of her, they lived by an ethical code of harmonious coexistence and reciprocity with nature, known as buen vivir. But then the conquest happened, and the wisdom of buen vivir was all but lost. The world I was born into had been shaped by Spanish invaders who cast aside the principled aspirations of buen vivir and promised progress through plunder. For centuries, the many disparate indigenous nations of the Amazon and their living forests were pillaged and destroyed in the name of progress, development, and profit. We were reduced to fighting over artificial borders brought by colonization in the newborn republics. People were taught to see our nation's wealth only in what could be extracted from the ground. First gold, and later minerals, timber, and black gold. But in the year 2019, the same year millions of acres of rainforest were burned down, the UN-sponsored science panel for the Amazon issued a severe warning that the Amazon was reaching a tipping point that would trigger a massive dieback on the entire forest, with catastrophic impacts for the future of humanity. It was finally accepted as scientific fact that the Amazon forest acts as a beating heart of the earth, circulating rain around the planet and regulating its temperature. The scientists were starting to understand what we've been saying all along. They joined us in acknowledging that at least 80% of this rainforest must be left standing to prevent the collapse of the entire planet's circulatory system. Though the forest was burning, the spirit of our people burned brighter. Once divided, the people of the region now united to issue the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Declaration. Put forth by the largest alliance of indigenous Amazonian nations ever assembled, their vision was ambitious and inspiring. To have these highly biodiverse headwaters of the Amazon River Basin recognized as permanently protected bioregion, a territory demarcated not by current political borders, but by its natural and cultural boundaries. The declaration called for a ban on industrial-scale resource extraction and instead mapped pathways for a just transition to a new regenerative bioeconomy. The formation of the initiative was an unprecedented step towards indigenous rights and stewardship. But it was just the beginning of a long journey. Before we could catch our breath from the fires of 2019, COVID erupted, killing millions around the globe. The pandemic helped expose inequity and fragility of the current economic system. People everywhere were fed up and ready for something different, but exactly what that was still not clear. And like heeding a call, 2021 brought global shifts in the right direction. The US rejoined the rest of the world in the Paris Climate Agreement, and even China committed to zero carbon emissions by 2060. Then, the Sacred Headwaters Alliance unveiled its bioregional plan, which laid out in detail the solution pathways that would protect the region and transform its economy to prioritize the well-being of ecosystems and communities.
Wow, that was so inspiring, to tell a story of the future, right? To help us visualize a future in which we are in right relationship with nature, and that we are creating ecosystems where people are put to work in the repair of the land. It's such a beautiful vision, and that's exactly what the Green New Deal proposed, right? To put people to work. And so, Varshini, it's so clear that the world needs action, and the IPCC report named that we have a small window of opportunity. And here we are in the United States, one of the largest polluters in the world. What does Sunrise's work look like in 2022? Also, a year where we were going to have midterm elections.
Thanks, Favianna. Yeah, this is, I feel like I have said this about every point in the last few years of my life, but I really feel like this is such a tough and painful and yet extremely critical time. When Sunrise launched, I guess almost 4 years ago now, we really had a core goal of making climate action that is rooted in racial and economic justice a top priority in American politics, and to turn that public support into durable federal policy. And I think many, many young people have been watching as our basically greatest shot at federal climate action within the very short time window that we have, as you mentioned, Build Back Better, just be languishing in Congress. And while we know, Build Back Better is the floor, not the ceiling, for what we need to do to resolve the climate crisis in a justice and equitable way, it's just heartbreaking, honestly, to see a single member of the Senate hold back trillions of dollars for what suffering communities need, not just on climate, but healthcare, for families, for immigrants. And so I think, it's a painful moment, but I think what it makes clear is that our generation and our people, we need more political power. We need greater representation in places like Congress. And we need folks who aren't just, walking on the floor for a vote. We need people who understand this issue in a visceral, gut way, who have lived it and understand what our generation is going through. So it is a big year. It's a big midterm year. And right now we are working to put more people in political office. Folks like Jessica Cisneros in Texas, who's going up against Henry Collar, somebody who has fought for fossil fuel investments and funding for racist immigration policies and accepted donations from fossil fuel companies. And Jessica is a young person who is fighting for everything that our generation needs. And I think a lot of us have seen the value of electing champions in Congress and the way they have brought the energy of our movement into the halls of power. And we need to keep building that mass of elected officials. So, just briefly, I'll say in 2020, over 1,000 teenagers and kids on Zoom made over 850,000 phone calls to elect Jamal Bowman, which ultimately allowed him to defeat a decades-long incumbent who hadn't prioritized fighting for the climate crisis or for young people. And so we have shown, like organizations like Sunrise and Justice Democrats have shown, we can win when thousands of people come together and take small actions in their lives to change structural issues. And we're planning to do it again with Jessica Cisneros' race, with Senate races in states across the country. And this is an extremely critical year in the midst of millions of people feeling demoralized because of the pandemic and because of the ways in which our government has been structurally unable to pass the policy that we need. So that is what we're going to be focusing on this year, to expand and build our political power. And I hope a lot of people who are watching this join us.
Thank you, Varshini. And also thank you, Sabrina and Rachel, for creating this film, which just, gives us insight on the powerful work that you and all of young people involved with Sunrise, and really young people involved in the climate justice movement, because it is truly the young folks who have helped accelerate a culture shift, right? And I want to definitely name that the climate justice movement is an intergenerational movement, and it's taken a new vision to help propel us to action in a much faster way. You know, at the climate conference, the UN climate conference in Glasgow, I clearly remember there was a New York Times article that said that the leaders of today's climate movement globally are young girls, and overwhelmingly young girls of color, right? And yet the folks making decisions inside of the official blue zone, overwhelmingly men, a lot of white men. And this year, the most represented was the fossil fuel companies. And so we know that these old structures, whether it's the old structures of governments, the structures of Congress, don't even get me started on the filibuster, all these old structures in Hollywood are just falling apart, and we need new narratives. We need new ways of organizing power. That includes the power we organize to tell our stories, and to take back the mic, because just like our communities have been extracted from, you know, the refineries are in communities, our labor has been extracted. In many cases, it's been stolen. Our culture has also been stolen. And so as we build political power, it's so critical to also build cultural power. And I'm so, you know, thankful to the work you're doing, Sabrina, not just as a filmmaker, but in the academy, in the with other Black filmmakers, because that's exactly the work we need. And you know, the climate storytelling playbook is these tools that are going to help people think differently, right? And so, as all of you filmmakers, creatives, folks who are watching, we need your courage. We need to accelerate these kinds of shifts. And so we are at the close of our panel. And before I want to ask each of our panelists to share a call to action. And I really want to thank you for doing the work to protect our only home. You are doing the work to protect us as human beings, right? And to protect all of the creatures um, on this planet. So thank you. And I would love for you to tell folks what is one thing that they can do. And I can go ahead and kick us off. My call to action is to creatives. We need you. We have about 7 years to take bold action and to drastically decrease emissions globally. And to postpone action means to postpone hope. So we need your stories. We need you to take risks. We need to remember that being inclusive is not just about including human beings. We need to include our Mother Earth. We need to include the creatures, the oceans, the forests, because it's time. And we need to spark the imagination of what's possible so that we can move past our grief and into a place of radical possibility. Thank you so much. Let's pass it off to you, Varshini.
Thank you. Well, mine is extremely simple. It's just join us. Whoever you are, whatever your talents are, help us build people power, help us build political power this year. You can do it wherever you are in the country. And you can get involved just by going to sunrisemovement.org or following us on any social media channel at Sunrise MVMT. This is a painful moment in this world, but I know that things are possible because I have seen massive, huge changes emerge just by the actions of ordinary people. So join us.
Thank you. And let's kick it off to you, Sabrina.
Yeah, so I think, you know, to bounce off of what you said, Favianna, and I think BIPOC filmmakers, I mean, we are here and we are, you know, doing the work. We have been doing the work, actually. And I think what we need to do is really continue to challenge, you know, the rest of the ecosystem of storytelling and filmmaking and of this industry, because we often, like, you know, reach out to filmmakers, but we really have to challenge the gatekeepers. We have to really bring them to task, to actually live up to the mandates that they say that they support. If they're talking about being inclusive and they're talking about equity, they're talking about centering our stories, then let's see some action around that. And we have to keep pushing for that, whether we're talking about funders, whether we're talking investors, whether we're talking about broadcasters, and because I think as storytellers, as who are almost by necessity, are cultural workers, activists, and to some extent, we are here and we're doing the work, and we have to be challenging people, like, just beyond. We can't be doing all the work ourselves. And I think the last thing I would say about that is nothing about us without us. So that's my call.
Yes. Close this out, Layel.
I love it. I love that I'm going after you, Sabrina. Well, first off, I just want to remind folks that the Climate Storytelling Playbook, a book that is really about screenwriting in the age of climate change, will be coming out this spring. So my call to action is, if you are a writer, if you are a filmmaker, if you're thinking about your next story and how to include climate change, please stay tuned. Follow us through the Good Energy Project as well as the Center for Cultural Power. And I hope that you get inspired to tell us, how are you telling your story? Who are you collaborating with? Who is your team behind the camera? It's time to unveil these white dominated hegemonic stories, and these storytellers, we need to see really the diversity behind the team to support the content. So please, my call to action is, please check out our playbook, as well as show us how you're making your story. The people behind the camera are as important as the people in front. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our wonderful speakers and to all of you joining us today. Thank you to the Sundance Film Festival, Macro, the Culture Change Fund, Women's Foundation of California, the Center for Cultural Power, Good Energy Project, Redford Centered, Laura O'Connor, and all the culture makers who made this possible. Thank you for joining us today.